test drive was promising. The sled didn't fall on its face, but it was sort of boggy. And at idle, it'd like to pull on the belt, like to roll away. So I know I've got some work to do. Here's a tool. It's bought for P85 Polaris clutch, but it seems to work on the old high performance clutch. And I'm a little tight. I have to shim that clutch out, you know, a 1/16 of an inch or something. The belt seemed to be riding up on one side. As well, the belt seemed a little tight. That's an 045 belt. If we find an 042, it might be perfect. So we'll pop that bolt off and see if we can't find some 1-inch shims. Well, that wasn't very tight. Holy moly. So we had one shim on there. See if we can find another one. Try one for now. I think I'm gonna possibly put one more in. That's the idea. So now that the carburation issue possibly is resolved on the TX440, I took the clutching apart on 197, which is the other sled that runs really good, and gathered up the same components. And I'll tell you what I'm using. This is a trade secret, but the factory recommended clutch weight is an AP weight. That's for Al Pinckney. I'm quite proud of that. Made for yours truly, and they're quite a heavy weight on the end, so they do have a massive upshift, and might be good for a light sled and a little guy like me. As well, what we have found is a clutch spring. I believe this to be a Comet Silver. And the engagement looks like it's about 80 pounds, and fully shifted out is about 190. So a pretty soft top end and spring. Again, good for a a torquey old 440 TX with a light weight on it. So we're going to install that clutching as well as a little bit of magic in the secondary and see if it will work as good as the other one. So we're just taking the little screws out. Again, this is the old Polaris, what I think is called the high performance secondary. They had different versions. This one has the wider brass bushing here, and they're cumbersome. They're not as easy to work on as a P85. You can change the weights on the sled, and you could do the same on this, but I like these old clutches because I've got lots of them. And once they're set up for the kind of effort we put into it, we're not trail riding these sleds, so once they're set up, you don't have to go in there anymore. Now, these clutches don't have an X on the face, this particular one, so it's been marked with some file marks there so we can get it back together roughly where it came apart. So, whoops, there's some bolts there. Now, I don't know what spring we had in there. It's got a flash of yellow on it, so we'll put that aside. And then we'll change the weights. This clutch is really not bad, but not great, so you'll recall in an earlier episode we drilled this clutch out to accept the 1/4-inch Polaris clutch bolts. It doesn't work really great at this point, but now if you're by yourself, as I always am, and have trouble pushing clutches together, I built myself a little chunk of wood that held the sheaves together or apart. You could just put a belt around. And I saw Ernie Moldovan down at Earl Grey Races one time doing this. He had a clutch puller with a big nut in it. When and if the clutch puller threads into the threads, you just use the nut to push your halves together. A proper machinist would weld a couple of rods in there so you had a spin thing, but haven't found, there's no proper machinist around here. So. And if we make our marks line up, Okay, that's together. Now we run into a little trouble, and in a panic mode I turned the camera off, but the clutch bolt we were using, the threads are buggered, and that to me makes me think the threads in the crankshaft are not in great shape either. So I found a new bolt, or a newer used one, with slightly more thread to it and nice and clean, and it torqued to 55 foot-pounds, so I think we're safe. But we're probably going to have to, next time this clutch comes off, to either chase those threads. There's lots of thread in the crankshaft yet. Find a longer bolt, or tap the crank and go to 9/16 fine, which is, I don't want to do that. So anyway, we're torqued to 55 foot-pounds, which should be enough. And now we'll take a look at the secondary. So instead of building a new secondary, we found one with a 36-degree helix, and it seems to have about 9 pounds tension when the other one is a bit lighter. But the sled seems to pull hard. We had a fouled spark plug, so we had to change that. Anyway, a couple things we're going to look at. We marked the primary clutch to see how much we're getting up. I know the other sled is pretty much at the top of the primary clutch, the belt, when it's on the 660 feet. So it's running pretty good. It seems to over rev a bit. Now, who can trust the old tack? I think these sleds are supposed to rev right around 7, and it's probably at 7,500. But if it can pull full upshift for the stock gearing, we know it's got to be flying along pretty good. So we're also going to pull the spark plugs and take a look. We did several hard runs, and it's a warm day, so I don't expect anything lean. So the PTO is not quite chocolate brown, but it's pretty dark actually. And the mag, that's a newer plug, but the electrodes look rich, if anything. So So here's where we're getting shift out, just to there. So there's a little more top end to be had on that sled. It seems to be over revving. So we've got the weights we want in there. We might look for just a little softer spring at fully engagement. And we can play with this as well. This is probably too stiff. So a little tweak on the spring in the secondary might just bring the RPMs down into the sweet range and allow it to shift right up. But it seems to pull pretty good. We cobbled together a bunch of secondary clutches. I'm happy with the primary clutch, but we've got 4 secondaries all set up with different calibrations, and the 5th one, the one that seems to work, is in the sled right now. So we're just going to go out and do some hot laps and see if it's running as good as its big brother there. Number 114, stock food class, the final instrument class. Does it for the TX440 rebuild. Grace had a good time at the Earl Grey races and won herself a prize, as you'll soon see. And it's not as good as 197, but it's close, so we just have to tinker with the fine tuning. Anyway, thanks for watching, and we'll have another project for you next time.